The American Psychological Association is pleased to sponsor the American Climate Leadership Summit. As psychologists, we study how people think and communicate about climate change. We help individuals and communities to reshape their climate-related behavior, and we respond to the mental health impacts of climate change. We are committed to helping people everywhere have a healthy and sustainable environment.
When I first got here, I used to go fishing down on the other end. And I ran up on this little small spit of land. So I thought I'd fish while I was there, and I started catching trout. I said, man, this is something. I gotta remember this place. So every year I would come back, and every year was a little smaller. And about the third or fourth year I went back, I couldn't find it. It was gone. If left unchecked, I would say, in 20 years, this island will be abandoned. You have to leave here. There was a presentation being made down at the levee board meeting. The proposal was oyster blocks made out of rebar. And I've been a welder all my life, and so volunteered to do the job. The way these things are designed, they rebuild land. The wave action brings in sand, and these things retain it. And it's happening. The land is building up behind these things, and it's like it's going to give us 20 feet more land for a quarter of a mile. And that's pretty substantial when you live on a 7-mile island with 1,500 people. By simply placing these oyster reefs out front of it, oh man, there's nothing like it.
Welcome. Welcome to our session on local communities and local climate action. I'm Jennifer Roberts, the former mayor of Charlotte and the director of ecoAmerica's Path to Positive Communities program. This is the program that works with local communities around the country on climate solutions and engagement. I'll be your host for this session. Our local communities are where we experience life, including pandemics, economic crises, climate impacts, and solutions to all of the above. State and local governments can support or hinder local solutions, but our mayors and city councils are where the local laws and resources make their way to people. Today, you're going to hear about what communities are doing to drive climate ambition, restoration, and justice in the midst of multiple challenges, and also learn how constituents can most effectively add their voices and ideas to these actions and solutions in an inclusive way. We're so fortunate today to have 3 speakers who have been integral to climate action at the local level. We have the Honorable Jackie Biskupski, former mayor of Salt Lake City, Utah, and a national leader on climate action. We have Honorable Errick Simmons, the mayor of Greenville, Mississippi, an active member of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, and Sarita Turner, who is the vice president for U.S. programs at the Institute for Sustainable Communities. So welcome to all of our amazing guests. And we're going to start with a question that constituents most wonder about. And that is, how do they get through to busy elected officials, to any local official? How do they get through to you, and how do they make their voices heard? While we're answering that, I want to direct listeners to the Action Center, because we have a poll there that is asking how many of you have tried to reach out to your local officials. So if you toggle over and take that survey, we'll talk about those results in a minute. Also, don't forget to continue to engage with our session on social media using the hashtag ACLS2020 Live. So now for our guests. What for you has been the best way that citizens can reach you, and how do people stand out in all the emails and phone calls that mayors and elected officials get every day? And I'm going to start with Mayor Biskupski. Okay. And if it's okay, we're going to use first names today, because one of the funniest things I remember at the U.S. Conference of Mayors is if you yell out the word mayor, and you get 30 people turning around to say hello. So, so Jackie, tell our listeners some of the things that they can do, what constituents can do to get through to elected officials.
Yeah, well, for me, I'm kind of old school. So during my campaign, I handed out my cell phone number. It was on my campaign literature, and I still have that phone number, by the way. I was listed in the phone book too, for those of you who use a phone book. And if you sent a friendly letter to my house, I personally made sure that we followed up on it. I think being cordial and kind in what you write to an elected official goes a long way. Emails go through other people first. And I know it's the easiest thing for people to do, but you have to know that those are being vetted by other people. When I was a legislator, they were being vetted, and when I was mayor, they were being vetted. So if they could go to someone else that could manage the issue, then they did. If they had to come to me, then they would. So maybe not the most effective in reaching the elected official, but certainly easy. If you're going to do anything in writing, I would always put your contact information on there, your address. If you live in a specific district and you want that elected official to know what district you're in, I think all that's very important. Mass emails on a particular topic do come to the attention of an elected official. So even if your particular mass email isn't being read by that person, if there's a whole bunch coming in, the elected official is going to know for sure that there's a hot issue, kind of popping up. I would say that advocates like Utah Moms for Clean Air here would tell you that building trust face-to-face is crucial in advocacy, but it's difficult during a pandemic. So you have to figure out how to still maintain relationships and make connection. I think people need to remember that elected officials are people and treat them well, no matter how hard that can be. Sometimes it's even been hard for me. Because every elected official will remember how you treat them. And at some point you're going to need them. And, like when I did the Community Renewable Energy Act here, I needed my very conservative Republican legislature to vote for it, and they did. And I think a lot of that has to do with relationship building that I've done over the years.
Jackie, thanks so much. Boy, you had lots of nuggets of wisdom in there, for sure. And Mayor Simmons, Errick, if you can go next. I know that Greenville is a little smaller than Salt Lake City, but you still have quite a bit on your plate. And how do people break through to reach you?
Yeah, besides the COVID-19 forcing us to close City Hall most recently in March, much like Mayor Jackie, I have an open door policy, have always had an open door policy for residents to come by and see me. If they cannot reach me, they will contact my staff members. We also kicked off a very exciting initiative. It was two parts. It was a problem-solving initiative, but also a healthcare initiative called Miles with the Mayor. And it was a way to provide a healthier city population, but also allowing an opportunity for residents to talk about any issues that they may have, any questions about city policies, including climate, the environment, trash, getting a cat out the tree, whatever it may be. We would walk on our levee trail, which was a 1.7-mile levee trail overlooking the river. And it was a way for them to get active, get fit. They can be walking along with the mayor. We would have water stations by our fire department. They could ask questions and we could talk and exercise at the same time. Also, we would have a series of town hall meetings, and we continue to do that today. Every summer in every single ward of the city, we have a town hall meeting with that particular council member. We give an update, but we also spend a large portion of that town hall meeting allowing citizens to complain, give solutions, give concerns, and it's always a wonderful way to get citizens engaged. And they're always full, the media is there, but the citizens want to be heard. We do newsletters. Social media has been very exciting. Our Mayor's Youth Council, we have a Mayor's Youth Council And we have Mayor's Youth Council students who are assigned to various issues, whether it's public works, if it's public safety, if it's ordinance and charter. And we get those students to get out not only in their schools, but also in their communities to see what issues young folks have to say about their government. And so that's a way we keep folks involved on all age levels.
Errick, it's great that you mentioned the youth. I was just smiling and thinking about some of the ways that we have helped involve youth with our Climate Ambassador program is by pairing the youth with older adults who don't know how to do social media.
That's right. We all can help each other some way.
We all need that help.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. Sarita, I know that you have been a national speaker. You've worked with communities all over the country and that you've had to help people make connection with local officials. So I'd love to hear your thoughts specifically around constituents in perhaps in communities that haven't had access to their local officials or haven't had access for, for that voice.
Yes, well, thank you, Jennifer. And I really appreciate the insights that Errick and Jackie gave earlier, and I want to build off of those. I think it's important to be confident in your request for a meeting and not to portray it as a favor, but also to be kind and polite and know that your elected officials are busy. Once in my own experience and in my professional experience where I had an ongoing relationship with a city council person in the community that I was working on behalf of and that I actually lived in as well, I emailed my city council person weekly. And several weeks went by, maybe about 8 before I got a response. But when I got a response, the first thing he said is, "You stay so kind," right? Because I just continued to acknowledge that he's busy, remembering that most of our elected leaders are in office because they wanted to serve the public. Right. They want to know you, they want to hear from you, they want to know what your concerns are, and they have lots of different folks that are trying to reach them and lots of priorities that they're trying to fill. So be patient, but be consistent and stay diplomatic and kind, even when it seems like maybe you might be being ignored. Don't allow yourself to be ignored, but still stay very diplomatic and kind. When you do have the opportunity for the conversation, be concise and stay on point. So that you can be really clear about what your request is or what your concern is. And if you have action strategies that you've already identified, which is really great to have done, be clear about what your request is. If you have the opportunity to know what your elected officials' priorities and platform are before you even request the meeting, and tying your requests to helping them foster the vision and values that they already had for the community and that are concerned about, is also wonderful. And also, once you have a meeting, if there are any action steps, please, reiterate those and be clear about your expectations, and also be clear about whether or not there has been an agreement on how to move forward. And if there hasn't, what are the follow-up steps that will be taken? Is there continued conversation needed? Is there additional information that you should send and provide to further illustrate your urgency and your requests? And then also, stay in touch from there. Don't, have it be a one and done deal that you only stay in touch when you want something, when you want a meeting, when you want to connect, but stay connected. Be on your elected leaders' email distribution lists. Be on their Facebook and their Twitter, offer tweets, and be active on social media. And like Mayor Simmons said, if you don't know how to get on social media and use it, get a young person to help you do it.
You're right.
Absolutely. Boy, those are all great tips. And you'll be interested to hear that from our survey, A quarter of our audience today, of those listening, have never contacted their local official,
Oh, wow.
which I hope they're all taking notes, because all the tips that you gave are perfect. And I hope it also helps them feel empowered to take that action. And Sarita, I love your focus on persistence, because we have, when we asked, have you frequently contacted, about half our audience said yes. So the frequent ones know about that persistence. But the quarter of the folks who are watching who have never done it, we would encourage you absolutely to use some of those tips and reach out. I would just add a couple more of my own from my time as mayor. And that is, again, there is strength in numbers. And if you have a number of folks who are concerned about your issue, whether it's stormwater or trees or flooding, a number of folks all adding their voice, forming a group, speaking as a coalition. I know that elected officials often listen if they know their numbers behind that viewpoint. The other tip I have is that if you are doing an email, in your subject line, put your request, because sometimes those staff who are thumbing through things quickly are looking at, what is the subject matter? And if you say, we want more trees on Main Street, put that in your subject line, then you know that somebody has read at least that much. So those are just a few of the things that I would add. And I also love that that you mentioned kindness, Sarita and Errick and Jackie, that kindness and being thankful and grateful, so that you're in contact, not just in the tough times when you're seeking things out, but also in the good times.
Yeah.
So I wonder, just to follow up on that, are there specific policies that you remember that did change because of constituent input? So Jackie, are there certain things you remember?
Yeah, for sure. We have a West Side Coalition, and like every city in the country, a major city in particular, our cities are divided by highways and trains, and low-income families are on one side and the other families are on the other side. And oftentimes communities of color are placed in areas where there's industry. So we know kind of this situation that has been laid out for decades has created real issues in the community. And our West Side Coalition here brought to the attention of the city food deserts in our city, where fresh food was limited. Access to that was very limited. So we created a food policy council in Salt Lake City, and that was, of course, made up of a very diverse group of people. And we empowered them to lead the change on policy and ordinance revisions. And what came of that, or just for some examples, is that they made it easier to raise chickens or bees. They created community gardens and urban farms. And they also developed the fruit share program and curbside composting in our city. So they are a very empowered group of individuals who have come together and created very sustainable ideas and practices that have made our city a better place. And I'm very grateful that this one particular issue was brought to us, and it just led to all this change.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Errick, how about you? Can you think of a specific case where the constituents made the big difference?
Yes, most recently, given COVID-19, of course, with all of the governor's stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders, we've had folks stand at home. Of course, they're doing more home improvements and renovations. And so we've seen an uptick of illegal dumping, including with contractors, tree cutters. And so we had a group of citizens to come to our city council meeting. Of course, they came to City Hall and called regarding illegal dumping in the city. And what we did was create an illegal dumping task force. And on May 19th of this year, we created a different ordinance where now you have community buy-in. Of course, you had city officials on this particular task force, police chief, the fire chief, the planning and zoning director, the code enforcer. to address uncleanliness, litter, and debris, to clean the city. We did a social media campaign where we showed piles of debris and dirt in the community, and it got young folks involved. It got folks sending Twitter and social media posts out, doing TikToks and all of that. And so got the media involved as well. And so now what started out as a concern for some is now a citywide accountability effort that all have come around. And so we have a tip hotline now. And if you see something, you say something, if folks is driving with a lot of trash to get ready to dump tires, citizens are calling in, our phones are ringing off the hook, and the city looks better given COVID-19, all through a concern of a few that turned to a citywide task force and an ordinance that we passed this May. And it's $1,000 fine, and it got some new things. Of course, we had some things on the books, but it was something that this group of folks saying, look, this is just ridiculous. Our neighborhood looks like a dump site. In time the garbage and trash crew coming down our street, residents are going to put stuff back out. And so they took control of their own community. There's always power in the people. And so I always like to tell the folks that, we're here just servants to do what they want us to do. Of course, we can have our agenda and our policies, but we're here to serve the people. And so that was a way that the people got involved to correct a bad wrong in the community. So it has panned out to be very well.
Boy, these are great examples. Wow. Sarita, I want to ask you the same question, but in thinking about constituents making that difference, what are also some of the challenges in getting the voices of some of the folks who haven't been reached out to before? Some of the challenges of marginalized communities, of divested communities. What are some of the challenges they face in making that case, and what's the success that you've seen there?
Well, that's a great question, Jennifer. I'm really glad you asked it, because I am thinking about two really different kinds of policy wins that came about in very different ways. One is we work with a group in New Orleans, Healthy Community Services, and they're have a collaboration of partners, different community organizations that they work with to do green infrastructure investments in the Treme neighborhood and the 9th Ward in New Orleans, where flooding is really has been catastrophic and continues to be a challenge. And so the community was really having a hard time with the permitting process. And these folks had never, they didn't see themselves as policy advocates or, organizers. They just, wanted to get skills in master gardening and put green infrastructure into their neighborhood to stop the flooding. And so they were having really delayed processes in getting the projects that needed permits. They were having really hard time getting the permitting process to happen in a way that allowed them to move their projects forward in a timely manner. And so what they did is they got all the master gardeners together and they organized, and they asked for a meeting with the sustainability officer in their neighborhood. And the sustainability officer was a really smart person to ask to meet with first. Why? Because that person actually is the person who, not that other people didn't care about their issue, but that person's job was to care particularly about sustainability strategies. And they worked with the sustainability officer, and they came up with a way to do a blanket permitting process for certain kinds of projects that they knew were coming down the pike and that they needed, and they got it passed. And so not only were they super excited that they got it passed, they learned that they can change policy and practice in their city. Now, I'm from Minneapolis originally. I live in Oakland, California, where Senator Kamala Harris is from. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Throw that in.
But I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And, Minneapolis has been in the news a lot lately for some really horrible reasons, but I'm so proud of my community in the way that they have stood up. And so sometimes changing policy can't be done nicely, right? It has to be demanded. And you have to get, especially deeply entrenched policy that has been a practice for years and years, and there are layers of bureaucracy and challenges in changing it. So in Minneapolis, there was, in the Twin Cities, actually, there was a transportation project to expand the transportation system to incorporate light rail to connect the communities, inner city communities, to the airport, and to connect downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And they did the station area stop studies, and they did a nice little placement of the station area stops, and the station area stops on the Green Line, the line which would connect Minneapolis and St. Paul, did not stop in the community that was most transit dependent. The communities that both Mayor, I'm going to use first names too, Jackie and Errick, talked about in the examples that they provided, communities that are often overlooked. And so the community organized, and they went to their city council person, and they went to the mayor, and they went to the Metropolitan Council, and they had no success. So they actually organized and filed a lawsuit with the federal government, and they changed federal policy in how transportation projects are scored. And that's an example of how policy gets changed as well. Now I'm thinking, and I'm praying, and I'm hoping that my community is about to change, provide examples for how to change policy that is entrenched, and it's the way things have been done and done for years again. And that didn't come nicely through just writing a letter or, showing up at a council meeting. But those are certainly the places that folks want to start. And sometimes we can ask nicely and organize and write a letter or show up at an office and work on a specific piece of legislation and work the room and get it passed. And sometimes it does take a little bit more rabble rousing and knocking on doors and letting people know that we're not going to go away and we need business, and maybe looking at legal recourse as well.
Yeah, and Sarita, you raise a really interesting point about it's not just local communities, but state and federal law that constituents are advocating about. And I know that as mayors, we often had to be that voice and the advocate at the state and federal level, but there are also ways that our constituents can support our actions there. And I know that both of you, Errick, I know you've been working on flooding issues and federal funding, et cetera. And I know that Jackie, you worked on transit, and you've had some amazing conferences come to Salt Lake City, but you've worked on the climate issues around energy, and again, involved working with the state. So what about some tips for how those climate issues get brought from constituents for state and federal action? Any good tips there?
Yeah.
Errick,
well, let me say, just throughout the Delta, Mississippi Delta region, folks are dealing with about a 30% poverty rate. We talked about those marginalized groups and are extremely vulnerable to climate change and induced disasters that we've seen with the flooding and all of that with the Mississippi River, and also the backwater flooding that we've seen as late here in the Mississippi River, particularly to drain the river, but too often it finds itself in those neighborhoods and that built-in infrastructure. I think it's important to understand that the folks that we represent along the corridor in my region are not coming to me to say climate change. They don't use the word climate change at all. They're talking about flooding. They're talking about their streets caving in. They're talking about sewer failures, understanding that the seepage from the flooding and the backwater is putting a strain on our sanitary sewer system. And so these families are looking for answers. And so the first people they come to is that mayor in Walmart, that mayor in Kroger or at church, not that state representative, not that person in the White House. So they come to those folks to look for solutions, and they're looking for it right now. They want to know answers right now. How can you help me? And so we do a number of things. I have been a member of the Mississippi River Cities and Town Initiative. Jennifer, you mentioned that in the intro of me, and we've seen in large part that people are ready for those conventional answers, but they also are open now to those non-conventional ways. And so in 2016, my constituents were only looking at how can we stop water from getting in their communities? How can we stop it? Looking at walls. But now things are changing. And people see that the value of wetlands and greenways and marshes and connected floodplains all make a difference in their communities. They understand the old ways of doing things have to change. For me, the most effective climate and environmental conversation I've had with my residents are when we all leave the climate drama behind us and focus on how we're going to make people safe and improve their home economy. And so if you look at that and connect to the increased natural infrastructure, there's a payback about 12-1 to the taxpayer on the ground. You have to ensure that new built infrastructure does not exacerbate the vulnerabilities, but lessen them. And you need to do it in a way through RFPs, zoning, and floodplains. In 2011 and 2016, and then the 2019 floods, I know in 2019, we had about 2/3 of Mississippi flooded. We had flooding to some degree in 2019 for about 9 months straight. We still cleaning up from that right now. Of course, then we got hit with the pandemic. By comparison, the municipal damages in 2011 flood was about 600,000. In 2016, we had about 500,000. In 2019, we're well over $4 million. And so what it does for a community that has a 38.6% poverty rate, it forces those folks that are more vulnerable, the poor, disadvantaged, the displaced, to come to their local leaders to look for kind of federal policy. And, you know, we have to see what we can do at the local level, but for the most part, cities and towns get hit because the only way we can really address those issues is through our sewer and water rates. But with folks with Social Security, fixed income, SSI, they got to get food for their medicines. You see us increasing a $2 or $3 regressive tax on those folks, and it hit hardest the burden of people who really don't have it. And so that's what we can do. But being a part of the Mississippi River Cities and Town Initiative, being a part of U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, it gives that conduit opportunity for my folks here locally, for me to be a voice for them and get the resources needed to try to give them answers to flood related and climate impacts that are
Errick,
happening.
those are, it's a great example of collective action and how many voices can really get things to move.
Yes.
And it's interesting you talk about that you didn't use the word climate change. People come at it from different ways.
Yes.
And Jackie, I know that in Utah, a conservative state, that climate change was a hard thing to use too when you first became mayor. And it's interesting. Not only did the city, but then the state has really become engaged. Can you tell a little bit about some of the ways that worked?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the Community Renewable Energy Act, and I'll walk you through that a little bit, because when I first ran for mayor, the people in my community were very angry with Rocky Mountain Power. They wanted clean energy. They weren't getting it because the state didn't want it. And the voters were looking for a mayor who would really take on that challenge. And I was fortunate to get elected. And I walked into office with an expired franchise agreement with Rocky Mountain Power and went to work with my sustainability director and team. And we brokered an unprecedented agreement with Rocky Mountain Power to go 100% renewable by 2030. And in order for the entire community to be able to opt into clean energy all at once, we had to pass HB 411, which is the Community Renewable Energy Act. So that meant all the times I was being nice to my fellow legislators and the governor, we had to cash in and get the voters to put the pressure on, and other communities to put the pressure on to bring the Renewable Energy Act to fruition. And we were successful. So now we have 25 communities in Utah on track to go 100% renewable by 2030.
And so that is a terrific story in Utah, and making that connection between everyday life and climate change and solutions is so key. Wow, time just flies when you're hearing all these great success stories, and they're so inspirational. I want to bring a conversation from one of our listeners, a question. In the midst of the pandemic, what is the best way in all the things you listed about engagement? What is the best way that people can break through that, and how has the pandemic changed that communication?
Well, I think, you mentioned the word, Jennifer, collective. And so the best way to communicate to your residents now is with a collective voice. Your faith-based community, your local elected officials, your state and federal elected officials, the CDC, our healthcare professionals, and our first responders. We've all come together, of course, 6 feet apart, wearing face masks, where our people can see us on the news saying wear masks, don't ask, just masks, and asking them to slow the spread, any way to slow the spread and meet those CDC guidelines and state and local guidelines. That's the best way to do it. We've been on social media, of course. We've done our Mayor's Youth Council, and a group of students have been outside of City Hall wearing their mask and say, this is what wearing a mask means to me. And then another student say, this is what it means to you. And so I would just close, being a man of faith, I mentioned faith. I'm often caught saying that the greatest love, the love commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself, the greatest love that we can show our brothers and sisters right now, given this pandemic, is wearing a face mask, staying 6 feet apart, washing your hands. And, I don't like to get into any political issue regarding First Amendment, Freedom Amendment. If you want to love your brothers and sisters, what the Bible say, just protect your folks. Put something on to protect yourself and others during this pandemic. And the duality of it is, when we can get back to opening full throttle, it's good for the economy, it's good for health, it's good for our schools, it's good for everybody. But everyone needs to be in a collective voice on the same page.
And that collective voice works on climate as well.
Yes,
Sarita and Jackie, we don't have much time, but please give us your closing comments.
Yeah, just really quickly, I'm glad that that question about engagement was asked, because it points back to an earlier comment that was made in our chat, and that Mayor Simmons followed up on. One, everybody's not concerned about climate change, but they are. So it depends on the way we talk to them and we connect climate to the concerns that they have. It's the same advice that we gave about going in to see your elected official, right? Try to connect it to concerns that are already a part of the platform. If we want people to respond and behave differently and get involved in this fight against climate change and the negative impacts of it, we have to connect that to the things that they care about. So if there's flooding in a community and there's illegal dumping, what is that? Then we have public health issues that are even exacerbated, and especially in a pandemic. We have to remember that we still have to have, and this might be good for us to remember, that we need to have multiple ways of connecting with people. We have become too dependent on some of the chatting and social media and video platforms. We need that, but we need to just pick up the phone and call somebody sometimes too. So
Jackie.
That's my 2 cents about what we need to do to really engage communities that are typically left out of processes and marginalized.
Thanks so much. We got a few seconds left, Jackie.
Yes. Well, real quick, I want to draw people's attention to an op-ed that Jennifer and I wrote for US News today. It's in the usnews.com website today, and it's practical solutions to the pandemic and the economy and how we can recover through a project that was worked on by Bob Perkowitz called Arches. And I would love for people to go to that article today and read it and get a great understanding about what's possible.
You guys have been so terrific. I just want to give a huge shout out and thanks to our speakers. You've got great positive ideas for everyone to follow. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a terrific conversation. Next up, we're going to hear, thank you. Next up, we're going to hear from youth leaders. We've been talking about them who've done more for climate action than most American adults. Find out what's next for the youth movement, and ways that we can support them to listen to their ideas. They're smart, well-informed, and they are moving mountains to ensure their future is one that is healthy, just, and thriving. So after we hear from our sponsors, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who you heard from before. Thanks again so much.